Do you remember those African American breakfasts your grandparents made? The ones that tasted like love and hard work? Each meal turned scraps into comfort and family into strength. What pieces of their mornings have we forgotten? Hot water cornbread was the kind of breakfast that came straight from memory and muscle. You did not need fancy tools or expensive ingredients, just cornmeal, salt, and a kettle of boiling water. The batter hissed when it hit the skillet, shaping into golden rounds that crackled and popped. Outside, they fried crisp and brown. Inside, they stayed soft and warm, almost like bread made of sunlight. It was food that stretched a little corn into something filling, something proud. Folks ate it with greens, beans, or syrup, but in the morning it was often dipped in honey or eaten plain with coffee. The smell filled the kitchen with comfort that carried through the whole day. Every bite spoke of hands that knew how to make much out of little. It was one of those meals that felt both humble and sacred, connecting generations through cast iron and heat. Hot water cornbread was not just food, it was heritage sizzling in a pan, proof that flavor never needed wealth, only care. Molasses and biscuit mornings were a sweet kind of memory that clung to every Southern kitchen. Thick sorghum molasses dripped from spoons onto hot biscuits fresh from the oven, turning the air rich and warm. This was the kind of breakfast that stuck to your ribs before a long day in the field or before walking miles to school. It was simple, homemade sweetness, the taste of reward after hard work. Mothers poured the syrup with practiced hands, knowing exactly how much each biscuit could hold. The molasses was earthy, smoky, and dark, bringing a richness that made sugar seem shallow. Children would press their biscuits flat just to soak up every drop. It was messy, comforting, and perfectly real. On Sundays, it was eaten slow, between laughter and stories, always with a steaming cup of coffee nearby. Even when times were lean, there was usually a jar tucked away for mornings like this. It was a reminder that sweetness did not have to be store-bought. Sometimes it just came from the earth and a little patience. Fried salt pork with red-eye gravy was breakfast for people who worked from dawn till dark. Thin slices of salted pork hit the skillet and popped in hot grease, sending out the smell that could wake an entire house. The drippings were stirred with leftover coffee, creating a thin, dark gravy with a sharp bite. It poured over grits, biscuits, or potatoes, transforming plain food into something bold. It was salty, smoky, and slightly bitter, the kind of flavor that stayed with you. This was not delicate food, it was survival food, strong and unapologetic. It came from farm kitchens, from mothers who cooked before the sun rose. The coffee gave it depth, the pork gave it strength. Together, they made a meal that carried you through the hardest labor. You could taste history in every spoonful, the struggle, the endurance, the art of turning scraps into sustenance. Red-eye gravy was not pretty, but it was powerful. It said, "We may not have much, but we will eat well anyway." Rice and butter with sugar turned yesterday's leftovers into something special. A pot of cold rice became breakfast once it met a knob of butter and a sprinkle of brown sugar. The grains loosened up as they warmed, soaking in sweetness and comfort. It was creamy, soft, and just a little sticky, the kind of meal that filled you without costing a dime. Some added milk if they had it, others stirred in molasses for a richer taste. For many, it was the first thing they learned to cook, simple, forgiving, and always satisfying. It tasted like care, like something made from love instead of plenty. Children scraped the bowls clean before heading out the door. It was a meal that stretched across generations, each spoonful carrying the same quiet warmth. There was no waste, no want, only resourcefulness turned into nourishment. Rice and butter with sugar reminded people that comfort did not need a recipe, just a little sweetness and a warm morning. Sweet potato biscuits brought color and comfort to every table they touched. Mashed sweet potatoes were folded into flour, butter, and milk, giving the dough a soft orange glow. When baked, they rose tender and fragrant, their edges golden and their centers meltingly light. They tasted faintly sweet, but carried a heartiness that stayed with you. You could eat them with ham, honey, or just a pat of butter, and they'd still feel like home. Sweet potato biscuits were more than food. They were care turned into something warm and golden. Families made them on Sundays, holidays, and any day that called for a little joy. The smell alone could pull everyone to the table before grace was said. They were proof that Southern kitchens did not need luxury to create something special. Every biscuit came from patience, hands, and history. Sweet potatoes gave them soul, but love gave them flavor. And that is why no breakfast felt complete without them. Salmon croquettes were the breakfast of ingenuity, born from tin cans and imagination. Canned salmon was mixed with onions, cornmeal, and a bit of egg shaped into patties and fried until crisp. The smell filled the house like a promise that the day would be all right. They were crunchy on the outside, tender inside, and full of flavor that reached far beyond their humble ingredients. The sizzle of the skillet was music, the sound of a meal stretching to feed everyone. Eaten with grits, biscuits, or a little mustard on the side, they turned a simple morning into something memorable. These croquettes were survival disguised as comfort food, proof that scarcity never stopped creativity. They were hearty enough for men heading to work and tasty enough to make children smile. The golden crust caught the light just right, shining like victory in the pan. Salmon croquettes were a triumph of spirit and taste over circumstance. Grits with cheese and scallions brought richness to the Southern table like few dishes could. Slow cooked until creamy, the grits were stirred with butter, sharp cheese, and chopped scallions. The result was smooth, savory, and full of depth. It was the kind of dish that made people linger over breakfast just a little longer. The steam rose thick, carrying the smell of warmth and comfort through the room. Grits had always been a staple, but this version felt like Sunday. It was humble food, made elegant through patience and love. Families ate it with fried fish, eggs, or alone, spooning up every last bit. Cheese added indulgence, scallions added brightness, and together they turned the simplest grain into something remarkable. It was a dish that celebrated flavor without waste, a small luxury earned through care. Every bowl felt like a reward after a long week, a quiet reminder that even the simplest foods could still feel special when shared. Hot cakes from scratch were the kind of breakfast that filled both plate and spirit. Made with buttermilk, flour, and a spoon of bacon grease, they sizzled on iron skillets until golden brown. The edges turned crisp, while the centers stayed soft and airy. These pancakes carried the smell of warmth, salt, and home. Syrup was a treat, but butter or molasses worked just as well. Children would line up with plates in hand, waiting for the next stack. Every flip of the spatula felt like love served hot. They were meals made from what was on hand, never fancy, always right. The bacon grease gave them flavor that stayed with you long after breakfast ended. Families gathered close, laughter mixing with the sound of frying batter. Hot cakes from scratch were not about abundance. They were about comfort built from what you had, made perfect with care. Fatback and eggs were the kind of breakfast that came with strength built in. Thick strips of salted pork fat fried up golden and crisp, filling the kitchen with a smell you could taste before the first bite. The grease left behind was used to fry eggs, toast bread, or drizzle over grits. Every part of it was used, nothing wasted, everything savored. It was food for people who labored, who needed fuel more than fancy. The crunch of fatback mixed with the softness of eggs made every bite satisfying and whole. It was simple, salty, and rich enough to make a poor morning feel abundant. This meal told a story of resourcefulness and care, of using what the land and the smokehouse could spare. It filled the stomach and steadied the soul. Fatback and eggs proved that sometimes the simplest foods carry the most power. Field pea fritters were born from leftovers but became something greater. Mashed field peas were mixed with cornmeal, onions, and a bit of flour before being dropped into hot oil. They fried up golden brown, crisp at the edges and soft inside. Each fritter carried the hearty taste of the earth, beans, grain, and a little salt. They were food made from what was left after the harvest, turned into something that brought joy. Even when money ran short, there was always enough for a pan of fritters. The smell of frying peas filled the air with warmth and pride. They were served hot with syrup, molasses, or just a smile. This was the kind of meal that brought everyone to the table fast. Field pea fritters were not fancy, but they were real, born from thrift and love. They fed the body, yes, but they also reminded folks that every scrap had value when made with heart. Homemade cane syrup drizzle was a sweet gift born from patience and persistence. Families grew sugar cane, harvested it by hand, and boiled it down slowly over open fires until it turned into thick golden syrup. The smell was deep and earthy, like caramel and smoke mixed together. When poured warm over flapjacks or grits, it shone like amber in the morning light. It was sticky, rich, and filled with flavor that store-bought sugar never had. Making syrup was a community task. Neighbors gathered to grind cane, stir kettles, and laugh through the steam. The first taste, still hot from the pot, was pure reward. Each jar held not just sweetness, but pride, the result of long days and shared hands. It was used sparingly, stretched carefully, and treasured until the next harvest. Over pancakes, biscuits, or cornbread, that drizzle turned plain food into a celebration. Every drop reminded folks of the land that gave it and the love that made it. Leftover grit cakes turned yesterday's breakfast into today's miracle. When the morning rush was over and the pot of grits sat cold, mothers would scoop what was left into a pan, chill it, then slice it thick by dawn. Those slices were fried in bacon grease until crisp outside and tender within. What started as thrift became tradition, proof that waste had no place in a careful home. Served with eggs or syrup, grit cakes were hearty, filling, and familiar. Their golden crust and soft middle carried the taste of patience and practicality. No one complained about eating them again. In fact, most looked forward to it. They were the kind of food that spoke softly of care, of making something new without needing anything extra. Even the smell of frying grits could bring everyone to the table fast. Leftover grit cakes were a reminder that the best meals are often the simplest ones, built from what was already enough. Hot buttered hoe cakes were the kind of food that defined Southern mornings. A batter of cornmeal, water, and salt was poured thin over a sizzling skillet, the edges crackling like music. They cooked fast, golden on the outside and soft in the center, each one brushed with melted butter the moment it came off the fire. Eaten with syrup, ham, or molasses, they were both breakfast and comfort in one bite. The name came from the days when farmers cooked them right on the flat side of a hoe held over an open flame. Simple tools, honest work, real food. The flavor was rustic, earthy, and full of heart. The smell filled cabins, kitchens, and fields, pulling people in before the first bite was even taken. Hoe cakes carried the rhythm of history, food made by hands that built and labored but still found time to create something beautiful. Nothing wasted, everything meaningful. Fried apples with cinnamon were the scent of comfort itself. Apples sliced thin were tossed in butter, sugar, and spice, then cooked slowly in cast iron until soft and golden. The air filled with sweetness and warmth, the kind that made even cold mornings feel kind. The fruit caramelized just enough to make its own syrup, thick and glossy. Some ate them spooned over biscuits, others with cornbread or grits. Children loved them best, sticky fingers and all, before heading off to school. They were one of the few sweet luxuries that did not require much, just a handful of apples and a patient hand with the skillet. The cinnamon turned the whole house into a memory before the meal was even served. Fried apples were humble, but they carried love in every spoonful. They reminded people that even the simplest food could make a home smell like joy. Hominy and ham scramble was a breakfast that worked as hard as the people who ate it. Coarsely ground corn kernels were fried with bits of ham, onion, and sometimes a splash of cream if fortune allowed. The skillet hissed, the scent of salt and smoke rising into the morning air. It was hearty, filling, and perfect for long days in the fields or at the mill. The sweetness of the corn balanced the savory ham, while the onions tied everything together. It was not fancy, but it was satisfying, the kind of meal that left you ready to face anything. Each spoonful carried the warmth of a shared table and the strength of tradition. Hominy and ham scramble was more than just food. It was the taste of survival made delicious. Crackling bread for breakfast was a sound and smell no one ever forgot. Cornbread batter was mixed with bits of crispy pork cracklings and baked until golden brown. The hot fat melted into the crumb, giving every bite a rich, smoky flavor. It came out of the oven singing, edges sizzling where the grease met corn. Served warm with milk or coffee, it was a feast all on its own. The texture was hearty and crisp, the kind that made each slice feel like a full meal. Crackling bread told a story of nothing wasted. Not even the skin of a hog went unused. Families would save scraps from butchering day just for this purpose. It was food built from gratitude, seasoned by necessity, and perfected over time. Each crumb was proof that even humble ingredients could bring abundance to the table. Cold biscuits with syrup or jelly were a working morning's salvation. When there was no time to bake or fry, yesterday's biscuits came to the rescue. Split open and drizzled with cane syrup or spread with homemade jelly, they softened into something sweet and tender. The flavor was simple but full of comfort. These were the breakfasts eaten standing by the door, one hand holding the biscuit, the other ready for work. Children loved the sticky sweetness. Adults appreciated the speed. It was proof that not every meal had to be warm to be good. In homes where nothing was wasted, even cold bread found new life with just a spoon of sweetness. The habit became tradition, a quick bite that still felt like love. Chitterlings and eggs were for Sunday mornings when the whole house smelled like patience and pride. The chitterlings were cleaned carefully, washed again and again, then seasoned deep with salt, pepper, and onions before hitting the skillet. They fried slowly, releasing a scent that told everyone it was a day worth slowing down for. The eggs came next, scrambled in the same pan so they could soak up every drop of flavor left behind. Together they made a breakfast rich enough to feel like a celebration, not just a meal. It was a dish born from necessity, but carried with joy, a way to turn what others overlooked into something worth gathering for. The taste was bold, earthy, and unforgettable, layered with memory and meaning. Coffee brewed in the corner, laughter circled the table, and music sometimes played from a radio humming low. Chitterlings and eggs were not for every morning. They were for the ones that mattered most. They tasted of care, community, and the comfort of surviving one more week together. Each plate told a story that stretched back generations, of families who knew how to make beauty from struggle and celebration from scraps. Coffee and condensed milk was the quiet start to countless mornings across generations. Before creamers, sugar packets, or modern machines, people reached for the same trusted can of condensed milk. It was thick, heavy, and sweet enough to turn even the strongest brew into something smooth and soothing. The first pour made a soft hiss, the kind that filled kitchens with calm before the day's noise began. It was more than just coffee. It was company, ritual, and comfort wrapped in steam. Men sipped it before long days in fields and factories. Women drank it while feeding children or ironing clothes. The milk stretched far, lasting through weeks of careful use, every drop measured with love and thrift. It tasted familiar, steady, and kind, the same way mornings always began. The smell lingered in the air long after the last sip, a sign the day had officially started. For many, it was their first sweetness, their first warmth, their first reminder that even simple things could feel abundant. Coffee and condensed milk was not fancy, but it was faithful, the flavor of home that stayed the same no matter where life went. Buttermilk and cornbread in a glass was a Southern comfort meant for hot mornings and tired hearts. Crumbled cornbread was dropped into cold buttermilk until it softened just right, a balance between spoon and sip. The mix was cool, tangy, and filling, enough to make a meal out of yesterday's bread. Some added salt or a touch of pepper for sharpness, while others left it plain, letting the buttermilk's bite speak for itself. It was food that required no heat, no hurry, and no waste, a quiet answer to long summer days. Farmers ate it before heading to the fields. Elders took it on porches with a sigh of satisfaction. It was simple food, yes, but it was deeply personal, connecting generations through shared hunger and gratitude. Children learned early to love it, not for sweetness, but for how it cooled the body and calmed the soul. It was the taste of peace after hard work, the sound of spoons clinking in heavy glasses. Buttermilk and cornbread in a glass reminded folks that true comfort did not come from riches, but from resourcefulness and rhythm, the kind passed down through every Southern kitchen that ever cared. Sorghum porridge was the kind of breakfast that filled both stomach and soul. Made from cornmeal slowly cooked in water or milk, it thickened into a smooth, golden base. Then came the sorghum, dark, sticky, and sweet, poured in thick ribbons that turned the porridge into comfort in a bowl. It had a deep flavor, richer than sugar, with the faint taste of smoke and earth. This was the kind of meal that warmed you from the inside out, especially on cold mornings when the fire had not yet chased away the chill. Mothers stirred it with wooden spoons, tasting as they went, knowing exactly when it was done. Children waited with spoons in hand, eager for the first bite. It was not fancy, but it was honest, full of energy for the long day ahead. Sorghum porridge taught patience, both in the making and in the eating. It was thick, hearty, and a little sweet, the kind of meal that made hard work possible and hunger distant. Every spoonful carried the memory of homegrown syrup and the rhythm of early mornings shared in quiet kitchens. Fried bologna sandwiches were proof that the best meals came from simple hands and clever hearts. A single slice of bologna, scored across the center to keep it from puffing, hit the cast-iron skillet with a hiss that meant breakfast was coming soon. The smell of salt and smoke rose instantly, filling small kitchens with warmth that no store-bought meal could match. When it curled up at the edges, it was ready, crisp, browned, and just right. Pressed between two soft slices of white bread, it became something far greater than its humble parts. Sometimes folks added mustard, a fried egg, or a bit of cheese, but it needed nothing more to taste like satisfaction. It was food for the people who rose early and worked hard, a breakfast that traveled well and filled the belly. Every bite carried the sound of the skillet, the memory of busy mornings, and the quiet pride of making something from little. It was the kind of meal you could hold in one hand and history in the other. Fried bologna sandwiches stood as proof that flavor, heart, and dignity could all fit between two slices of bread. Rice pudding for breakfast was a bowl full of comfort and care, made from what others might have thrown away. Cold rice from supper the night before found new life in a pot of milk, sugar, and butter. The spoon moved slow as it simmered, thickening until it became creamy and golden, the scent of sweetness spreading through the kitchen. A pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg added warmth, while raisins softened into tiny bursts of flavor. Sometimes, a pat of butter melted on top like sunlight on snow. Children waited at the table, eager for that first warm bite, while their parents smiled, knowing every spoonful stretched the pantry just a little further. It was food that taught gratitude, nothing wasted, everything used. The taste was soft, familiar, and full of memory, sweet enough to start the morning right. It filled small homes with peace and the gentle rhythm of spoons tapping bowls. Rice pudding for breakfast was more than food. It was family, thrift, and love stirred together until golden. Even now, its sweetness carries the reminder that simple things often linger longest. Ham hocks and grits were the taste of strength, the kind of breakfast that gave purpose to long Southern mornings. The hocks, salted and smoked to perfection, simmered for hours until their meat softened and the broth turned deep and rich. That liquid gold was poured beside steaming bowls of grits, stirred smooth with butter and a pinch of salt. Together, they created a meal that was simple, soulful, and sustaining, the very essence of working-class pride. The smoky aroma filled kitchens, mingling with the hum of conversation and the rattle of spoons in enamel bowls. Every bite carried the story of patience, of making the most out of little, and of turning scarcity into satisfaction. It was food meant to last, to fuel bodies that toiled in fields or factories. Paired with black coffee, it became a ritual, strong, grounded, and unwavering. Ham hocks and grits were not delicate, but they were honest. They represented endurance, flavor born from necessity, and comfort earned the hard way. The meal was slow to make but quick to disappear, leaving behind full bellies and grateful hearts. It was proof that real nourishment came not from wealth, but from wisdom passed through hands and time. Corn fritters with syrup were the kind of breakfast that could turn an ordinary morning into a celebration. Kernels of sweet corn, fresh from the cob or scraped from leftovers, were folded into a soft batter of flour, milk, and egg. The mixture dropped into hot grease with a hiss, frying until golden and crisp at the edges while staying tender inside. The smell of corn and sugar filled the kitchen, clinging to the air like joy. When stacked high and drizzled with syrup or honey, the fritters gleamed beneath the morning light, a feast for both eyes and stomach. Children devoured them fast, laughing through sticky fingers, while elders took slow, satisfied bites. The taste was summer captured in a skillet, sweet, warm, and familiar. Corn fritters were more than food. They were family-made edible, a recipe shaped by time and tenderness. Even in hard years when ingredients were scarce, there was always enough for a pan of these golden treasures. They were the taste of comfort in motion, sweet proof that happiness could still grow from humble hands and hot oil. Homemade apple butter toast was the taste of patience rewarded, a sweetness that lingered long after the morning was gone. Apples, gathered in fall, were peeled, sliced, and simmered slowly with sugar, cinnamon, and cloves until they turned dark and velvety. The process was slow, hours of stirring until the mixture thickened and glowed like autumn sunlight trapped in a jar. When spread warm on toasted bread, it melted slightly, leaving trails of spice and caramel. The scent alone could fill an entire house with comfort. Families made apple butter in large batches, storing it through the cold months as a reminder of harvest days. It was shared with neighbors, gifted to friends, and spooned onto biscuits with care. Each bite carried the flavor of time, deep, spiced, and made to last. It tasted of hearth fires, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Apple butter toast was not just breakfast. It was a story, a ritual, and a memory combined. It taught that some of the best things in life cannot be rushed. They must be stirred, savored, and shared. Stewed tomatoes and biscuits were a breakfast for mornings when cupboards were thin but spirits stayed full. Tomatoes were peeled and simmered slowly with onions, sugar, and a pat of butter until they melted into a thick, tangy stew. The smell drifted through the house, rich and familiar, wrapping around the early hours like a blanket. Fresh biscuits were pulled from the oven, their crusts crackling as the steam rose. When the tomatoes hit, the bread softened just right, soaking up every bit of flavor. It was sweet and savory at once, proof that even the simplest garden foods could feel like comfort. Families who had little found plenty in this dish, learning that creativity often grew where money could not. Every spoonful carried the taste of warmth, care, and quiet resilience. It was breakfast made not from what was missing, but from what remained. An art that turned survival into satisfaction. Even now, that same pairing of tangy tomato and soft biscuit carries memory in its flavor, reminding us that food has always been more than hunger. It was history served on a plate, the flavor of perseverance made tender by love and heat. Peanut butter and molasses on bread was a breakfast that tasted like invention and endurance. Long before grocery stores carried endless jars, families roasted peanuts by hand, grinding them with spoons or stones until smooth. Then came the molasses, dark, thick, and sweet, a little drizzle turning the mixture into gold. The spread was sticky, strong, and full of flavor that lingered. It clung to the bread, soaked into its edges, and carried a sweetness that never felt cheap. For children, it was a treat. For adults, it was fuel for the day ahead. This simple pairing spoke of thrift, love, and resourcefulness, the art of making joy from what was already there. It filled bellies without emptying wallets, a small triumph of flavor over circumstance. The smell of roasted peanuts mixed with syrupy sugar could turn any morning softer. It was breakfast that tasted like care, like work, like home. Every bite was balance, sweet meeting salt, need meeting creativity. Peanut butter and molasses on bread became a tradition not just for taste, but for what it meant. That even the humblest meal could carry dignity and delight. Fried catfish and grits brought coastal pride straight to the breakfast table. Fresh-caught catfish, rolled in seasoned cornmeal, hit the hot skillet and sizzled into golden perfection. The air filled with that unmistakable scent, crisp, buttery, and full of promise. Beside it, grits simmered low and slow, stirred with butter until smooth and creamy. Together, they made the kind of meal that could hush a room with the first bite. The crunch of fish met the softness of grits like rhythm and harmony. Some folks added hot sauce or lemon, others just a shake of salt, but everyone agreed it was comfort made visible. It was a weekend breakfast, a celebration meal, a reason to sit down slow and stay a while. The flavors were bold but familiar, reminding everyone that strength and softness could share the same plate. Fried catfish and grits were more than food. They were a ritual, a memory, a piece of identity carried from kitchen to kitchen. It was the taste of family, community, and home, all found in the quiet hum of a Saturday morning. Leftover sweet potato hash was the Southern way of turning thrift into beauty. Soft cubes of roasted sweet potato were tossed into a skillet with chopped onions and a spoonful of pork grease. The sizzle came fast, filling the air with a scent both smoky and sweet. The edges crisped, the onions caramelized, and the pan came alive with color and comfort. What had been last night's side dish became the star of a brand new morning. Every forkful carried warmth, depth, and memory, proof that nothing good ever truly went to waste. The sweetness of the potatoes balanced the salt of the grease, a dance of flavors born from simplicity. It was food made with wisdom, where nothing was thrown away and everything was cherished. Families served it beside eggs or biscuits, or just ate it straight from the pan. It was humble but proud, a dish that spoke softly of care and resourcefulness. In every bite was a reminder that the best meals were not about what you had, but about how you used it. Sweet potato hash was survival turned soulful, and no one left the table hungry. Roasted chestnuts carried warmth and nourishment through the cold months when plantation rations were meager and gardens lay dormant. Enslaved families foraged chestnut trees that grew wild in the surrounding woods, gathering the smooth brown nuts and roasting them in hearth ashes or iron skillets until their shells cracked and the sweet flesh softened. The nuts' high energy content and natural sweetness made it an important source of calories and comfort, especially during long winter evenings. Roasted chestnuts became part of a wider African American food tradition, appearing in holiday celebrations and roadside markets after emancipation. Their gentle flavor paired well with cornmeal breads and simple stews, and many families passed down techniques for roasting and storing them long after the plantation era ended. Today, roasted chestnuts sold at winter festivals and city street corners carry echoes of that history, reminding us that what began as a survival practice also nurtured community and seasonal ritual for generations who transformed hardship into enduring culture. Red drink, Juneteenth punch, flowed like a symbol of freedom and memory at community celebrations marking emancipation. Made from hibiscus petals or bright strawberries steeped into a deep crimson infusion, the drink stood for resilience and the blood of those who fought for liberation. Families would gather in churchyards and town squares, pouring the sweet, tangy liquid into simple cups while music and laughter filled the warm June air. Children chased each other between picnic tables as elders told the story of the first Juneteenth, reminding everyone of the hard-won joy behind the holiday. The punch often carried a gentle spice from cloves or ginger, offering a flavor both refreshing and layered, much like the history it honored. Preparing the drink was as important as drinking it, with women and men alike contributing fruit, sugar, and labor to the cause. Though some communities still keep the tradition alive, many younger generations have never tasted the vibrant red drink that once defined a day of remembrance and celebration. Ham bone soup with vegetables was one of those meals where one piece of meat flavored an entire pot. A single ham bone, stripped of most of its meat, simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and smoky. My grandmother would add beans or greens if she had them, letting the flavors meld into something far more substantial than the ingredients suggested. Families gathered around steaming bowls, dipping bread into the broth and savoring the flavor the bone had left behind. It was frugal cooking at its finest, taking scraps and stretching them into nourishment. The soup fed many mouths, warmed cold nights, and made do with what was available. In the 1960s, when meat was costly, a ham bone could be the centerpiece of dinner, proving that thrift and patience could coax flavor out of nearly anything. Ham bone soup with vegetables carried both practicality and comfort in every ladleful. Corncob jelly was sweetness made from what everyone else would have thrown away. When the kernels were long gone, grandmothers gathered the empty cobs, boiled them until the water blushed golden, and stirred in sugar until it gleamed like melted sunlight. The scent filled the air, soft and buttery, with a whisper of summer still clinging to the pot. Once cooled, it set into a glossy jelly, clear as amber and delicate as spun glass. Spread on biscuits or cornbread, it shimmered in the morning light, tasting faintly of cornfields and warm days. There was something almost magical in the way it turned waste into beauty, a sweet defiance against hunger and hardship. Each jar of corncob jelly held more than flavor. It held proof that nothing in a southern kitchen was ever truly useless. It was passed between neighbors, sold at church socials, or gifted with a ribbon tied around the lid. For families who had little, it brought luxury to breakfast and hope to the table. Corncob jelly was not just food, it was gratitude preserved. Rice and molasses supper was one of the simplest meals, but also one of the most remembered. A pot of rice was inexpensive, filling, and always on hand, but paired with a drizzle of molasses, it turned into something sweet and sustaining. Sugar was too costly for everyday use, but molasses was affordable and sold in larger tins that seemed to last forever. Families poured it over steaming bowls of rice, letting the dark syrup seep into the grains until they gleamed. The taste was rich, almost smoky, with just enough sweetness to make children smile. It was often eaten at the end of the day when no meat could be spared, and it carried people through the night with enough strength to face the next morning. My grandmother told me rice and molasses was a treat disguised as necessity, proof that resourcefulness could soften the edge of scarcity. In the 1960s, when black families were stretching every dollar, rice and molasses kept hunger at bay while still offering a touch of comfort. Simple, cheap, and unforgettable, it was a meal born of need but remembered with love. Fried green tomato. Po' boys turned unripe tomatoes into a sandwich that tasted like pure coastal sunshine wrapped in crunchy cornmeal. Thick slices of firm green tomatoes were dredged in seasoned cornmeal and fried until their edges crisped and their centers softened just enough to release a bright tang. Piled high on soft French bread with a smear of remoulade and a handful of shredded lettuce, they became a favorite along Gulf Coast streets where shrimp boats docked and music floated from open windows. Vendors often sold them at fish fries and fairs when seafood prices climbed too high, proving that a garden vegetable could carry the day as well as any oyster or crab. Families remembered the scent of hot oil and the pop of cornmeal batter while waiting in line for a sandwich that blended thrift and celebration. Today, fast food counters try to imitate the flavor, but they cannot capture the quiet magic of fresh garden tomatoes picked before ripening, fried in backyard kitchens, and shared among neighbors who knew the value of every bite. Maypop fruit mash turned the wild passion fruit of the American South into a rare dessert filled with tropical fragrance. Known as maypop for the sound of its hollow fruit when stepped on, this native vine produced aromatic yellow fruits that ripened in late summer. Enslaved foragers gathered the fruit, split the rinds, and scooped the bright pulp into a bowl with a drizzle of molasses or honey when such sweeteners were at hand. The result was a naturally tangy treat that needed no cooking and provided a burst of vitamins. The flavor, a cross between citrus and melon, delighted anyone lucky enough to taste it. Even after emancipation, rural families prized maypops for jellies and pies, and the plant remains a cherished wild edible across the Southeast. Maypop fruit mash preserves a memory of fleeting seasonal abundance and the creativity that transformed wild gifts into moments of celebration, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, people found ways to enjoy the bright, unique flavors offered freely by the natural world. Pickled watermelon rind turned summer scraps into something bright and memorable when waste was never an option. Families peeled the green rinds from sweet watermelons, cut them into strips, and simmered them in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until the pieces turned translucent and tender. The finished pickles carried a gentle sweetness with a tart kick that balanced fried fish or smoky barbecued pork. Children often helped pack the jars, laughing as the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and clove. These jars lined pantry shelves and cooled in cellars, ready to brighten winter meals with a taste of summer. For many households, this thrifty condiment was a sign of careful planning and pride in making every harvest last. Today, few people bother to save the rinds, and the recipe hides in old notebooks and fading memories. Yet those who remember speak of the surprising pleasure of that sweet, sour crunch beside a plate of fried catfish. Fried rice with scrambled egg was the kind of supper that could be made out of almost nothing but still managed to feel hearty. Leftover rice was saved from the night before, reheated in a skillet with a little oil or lard, and then combined with scrambled egg to add richness. My grandmother would sometimes add chopped onion or green pepper if the garden allowed, but the dish stood strong even without extras. The rice fried up golden, the egg binding it together into something more than scraps. A dash of salt and pepper finished it, though hot sauce often appeared at the table too. What amazed me was how it transformed simple grains into a filling plate that stretched across a family without breaking the budget. The meal carried warmth and thrift in equal measure, reminding everyone that dinner did not need meat to be satisfying. In the 1960s, fried rice with scrambled egg was not fancy, but it was dependable, the kind of dish that fed children and adults alike with just enough to keep spirits steady. Mustard green chowder was the kind of soup that filled the air before it filled the bowl. It began with bacon ends and onions cooked down until the scent turned smoky and sweet. Then handfuls of chopped mustard greens were stirred in to simmer slowly. No cream, no fancy stock, just patience and a steady hand. The greens softened, giving the broth a peppery bite and a deep, earthy color. It was simple food, yet it carried layers of flavor that comforted tired families. Served with a wedge of cornbread or poured over rice, it was as rich as anything served in fine restaurants. The taste was bold but kind, a spoonful of history that reminded people they could still find warmth even when money was thin. Mustard green chowder was thrift turned into nourishment, a pot full of pride and resourcefulness. Homemade chow chow relish added brightness and crunch to plates crowded with greens, beans, and smoked meats. Cabbage, onions, peppers, and green tomatoes were chopped fine and simmered with vinegar, mustard seed, and sugar until they formed a tangy condiment that could last through winter. Every household had a slightly different recipe, some sweeter, some hotter, each a reflection of the cook's own hand. The relish brought sharp contrast to rich dishes like pork shoulder or pinto beans, cutting through heaviness with a lively bite. In late summer, neighbors gathered to chop vegetables together, sharing stories as big pots bubbled on outdoor fires. Jars lined pantry shelves in rows of glowing gold and green, a promise of flavor when fresh produce was long gone. Over time, store-bought pickles and bottled sauces replaced the careful preparation of chow chow, but its memory endures wherever families recall the sound of knives on wooden boards and the reward of a bright spoonful alongside a hearty meal. Pine needle tea offered a bright and restorative drink when fresh produce was scarce during cold months. Enslaved foragers collected the youngest green needles from longleaf and loblolly pines, rinsed them carefully, and steeped them in hot water until the brew released a light citrus aroma. Rich in vitamin C, this tea helped ward off scurvy and brought a welcome freshness to winter diets heavy with salt-preserved foods. The practice echoed both indigenous traditions and West African herbal knowledge, merging two continents' wisdom into a single sustaining cup. Families continued to brew pine needle tea well after emancipation, and it remains popular among modern herbalists for its gentle flavor and reputed immune-boosting qualities. Its evergreen scent and warm golden color remind us that even in the most barren season, the forest offered nourishment. Pine needle tea illustrates how observing the land and respecting its cycles allowed people to find both medicine and comfort, turning what others overlooked into a sustaining daily ritual that strengthened body and spirit alike. Collard green sandwiches were the working person's lunch, built for long days and calloused hands. Cold collard greens, left over from the night before, were pressed between thick slabs of cornbread still warm from the skillet. Sometimes there was bacon grease brushed inside for flavor, sometimes just salt and love. It was food meant to travel, sturdy, filling, and easy to eat between shifts or in the shade of a field. Every bite was smoky, tangy, and satisfying, a little taste of home wrapped in practicality. You did not need silverware or a plate, only the will to keep going. These sandwiches held the spirit of the South's hardest workers, people who made do with what they had and still made it taste like something fine. The greens gave strength, the bread gave comfort, and together they carried families through hard seasons. Collard green sandwiches were humble, yes, but they fed both body and pride. They proved that even leftovers could tell a story of perseverance and belonging. If one of these breakfasts stirred a memory, drop your favorite below and hit like and subscribe to keep the flavor of the past alive.